Eddard Stark stood on the balcony of the Red Keep, his eyes fixed upon the labyrinth of streets and red-tiled roofs that stretched beyond the castle walls. From his vantage point, he could see the snaking course of the Blackwater rush, the dark waters tinted by the final rays of sunset. The sky was streaked with soft orange and purple, a swirl of color that might have inspired awe on another day, in another life. But tonight, the beauty of King's Landing felt lost on him, an afterthought to the burden that weighed on his heart. He had always been a man of duty, a man who believed in honor, but the city seemed to mock him now with its teeming life. He could almost hear the crowds below, haggling in the markets, singing bawdy songs in seedy taverns, or simply trying to scrape by in alleys and corners best left unmentioned. They did not know that the realm stood at the edge of a knife, its fate resting on decisions that would be made here, in the Red Keep. Ned felt a deep weariness in his bones, an exhaustion that had started the moment he discovered the truth of Joffrey's parentage and realized that Robert Baratheon's children were not truly his. He had tried to proceed with caution, yet each step in this accursed city led him deeper into a quagmire of deceit. Honor had demanded he act, but if he pushed too far, it might plunge the realm into a civil war. And so he had hesitated, waiting for the right moment, the right plan. What did honor demand now, when everything he thought he knew about justice and loyalty was threatened by the cunning whispers of courtiers, the cloying presence of Littlefinger, and the quiet manipulations of Varys? If he called the banners of the North and openly challenged the Lannisters, Westeros would bleed. The small folk would pay the highest price. To openly declare war on the Queen's family, to spill blood on the battlefields from the Riverlands to the Crownlands, might save the realm from a false king but at an unimaginable cost. He had always been a straightforward man, not prone to cunning or the twisting of words. Treachery was an uncomfortable cloak to wear. But if he had learned anything in King's Landing, it was that straightforward men were easily broken here. He could not simply stride into the throne room and denounce Joffrey. He would not survive the moment, yet neither could he allow a false king to sit upon the Iron Throne. He could already see the shape of the war to come if Cersei was allowed to maintain her position of power, if her children were proclaimed the rightful heirs. Between his sense of duty and the impulse to save innocence, Ned found himself faced with a choice he had never expected: to stage a coup, to seize control of the city, and to remove the Lannisters by guile rather than by open war. The notion made him uneasy. A coup felt like a betrayal of everything House Stark stood for, yet time and again men of honor had fallen prey to those more cunning in the Game of Thrones. Perhaps this was the moment when even Ned Stark must learn to play. He pressed his hands against the cool stone balustrade and let out a breath that trembled with all the weight of his decision. In a single fluid motion, he turned and left the balcony, already knowing what he needed to do. He had begun laying the groundwork days ago. If he hesitated any further, it would all come to ruin. He walked through the corridors of the Red Keep, his boots making steady, echoing taps against the polished floors. Along the way, guards in Lannister crimson stood at attention, each armed and watchful, though they did not impede him. He was the hand of the king, after all. Officially, that gave him broad authority, but he knew that the Lannister men watched him for any sign of betrayal. If they suspected so much as a hint of his plan, they would attempt to strike him down, honored position or not. His first destination was the small chamber near the Tower of the Hand, where he had instructed a few of his most trusted people to gather. Within that chamber was Jory Castle's cousin, Tomard. There too was Hallis Malin, and a handful of other loyal swords from the north who had accompanied him to the capital. They stood upon his entrance, curiosity clear in their eyes. In the flickering torchlight, their faces looked hardened, resolved, and a bit fearful. They were ready to follow him, but none of them knew precisely what he intended. He bid them sit and took a seat himself on a simple wooden bench. There was no regal table or plush chairs here, no symbols of status, just the plainness of a small guardroom. He spoke quietly, voice hushed in the gloom. "We cannot act rashly," Ned began, his voice firm despite the nervous tension in his chest. "There is more at stake than we ever suspected. The Lannisters have strangled King's Landing in their web. The gold cloaks, the treasury, and the Queen's manipulations are all arrayed against us. But if we raise the banners from the north, half the realm will burn before the falsehood is exposed. I will not have the small folk pay that price." Tomard frowned. "My lord, do you mean to say we will not call upon our men at arms? If it comes to a fight, we'll be outnumbered 100-1 in this city." Ned clasped his hands. "We will not fight them in the open. Not yet. We shall act from within this castle, controlling the levers of power before the Lannisters can react. We must neutralize their most dangerous advantage, the City Watch. If we have the Watch on our side, we can detain Cersei, Joffrey, and every Lannister loyalist in one swift motion. If we fail, we die, along with what hope remains for peace." They exchanged uneasy glances. Hallis Malin leaned forward, speaking with the accent of the North. "Lord Stark, how can we turn the City Watch away from the Queen? The Lannisters have been lining their pockets with gold." "So I've heard." Ned nodded slowly. "They have indeed. But the City Watch is commanded by men who value coin as much as loyalty. I have arrangements in place with Littlefinger." He nearly spat out the name. "He claims to have matched the Lannisters' bribes, but I do not trust his ambitions. We must not rely on him alone. That's why I've also seen to it that the Watch's leadership knows the next coin they receive might come from a new regime. If that does not entice them, fear of what comes next might suffice." Somewhere in the back of his mind, Ned felt a pang of guilt at these underhanded tactics, but time for guilt was short. Honor demanded the realm be saved from war, even if it took cunning to do it. He concluded the meeting with instructions to his men. They were to spread out through the Red Keep and remain on alert. When the time came, they would help the Gold Cloaks in securing the royal family, but they must act only when Ned gave the final signal. One unguarded whisper, one suspicious movement, and the coup would unravel in a sea of blood. At the same time, he secretly dispatched a messenger to Renly Baratheon's apartments, requesting a private audience. Renly was Robert's younger brother, a man who had always seemed more interested in fashionable garments and tournaments than governance. But Ned had not failed to notice that Renly had a sharp mind behind his charismatic smiles. If the realm needed a new king, and if the truth of Joffrey's parentage came to light, the Baratheon line would logically pass to Stannis. But Stannis was far away on Dragonstone, and the older brother's temperament was harsh as iron. Renly, for all his frivolities, was in King's Landing, and in Ned's estimation, Renly would not be a bad choice if it meant peace and stability. But first, Ned needed to ascertain Renly's intentions, whether the young lord was truly committed to saving the realm or only out for himself. The messenger returned with a simple nod. Renly would grant him a private meeting that very night. So, hours later, well after the setting of the sun, Ned found himself walking through the dim corridors of the keep, torchlight dancing on the walls. The hush of the night had descended upon King's Landing, but the capital city was never truly quiet. The muffled roar of distant crowds seeped through windows, mixing with the clicking footsteps of patrolling guards. Finally, he arrived at Renly's quarters. It was a set of luxurious rooms near Maegor's Holdfast, where the younger Baratheon brother resided, having once served on the small council as Master of Laws. Ned paused before the guarded door. He eyed the two guards, men in Baratheon livery, stags rather than lions. They acknowledged him with a nod and let him pass. Inside, candles illuminated furnishings that were rich but tasteful. Renly stood near a large table that seemed laden with maps and empty scrolls, as if some private plotting had been going on. The younger man looked up from the table as Ned entered. A faint smile touched his lips, but there was caution in his bright eyes. "Lord Stark," Renly greeted, gesturing for Ned to come closer. "You asked for a private word. I'm pleased to oblige, though I must admit a certain curiosity. You don't often send for me, especially at this hour." Ned wasted no time. "Lord Renly, I've asked to see you because I believe you care about the fate of the Seven Kingdoms more than most men here. We stand at a precipice. You know as well as I do that Joffrey is no rightful heir. Robert never fathered him." Renly's gaze flicked away for a moment, but he quickly composed himself. That is a rather bold statement, Lord Stark, and a dangerous one to utter at court. Must I pretend I don't know what you're talking about? Ned's jaw tightened. There is no time for pretense. The Queen has maneuvered to seize power. My men are preparing for a decisive action, so that we might remove Cersei and her children from the line of succession. I have called upon certain resources to ensure the City Watch sides with me. But even if we succeed in capturing the Queen, the realm will need stability. We need a Baratheon king to keep the great houses in line. Renly slowly ran a finger around the edge of a goblet that rested on the table. A swirl of red wine sloshed inside. He was silent for a few heartbeats. And why do you look to me, not Stannis? Stannis is older. By rights, the crown should pass to him if Joffrey is disqualified. Ned considered carefully how to phrase his reply. Lord Stannis is indeed Robert's rightful heir, but he is not here. He is on Dragonstone, gathering who knows what strength. In the meantime, the Lannisters will not sit idle. They will call their banners, attempt to put another puppet on the throne. Tommen or Myrcella, perhaps, if they cannot salvage Joffrey. By the time Stannis arrives with enough force to assert his claim, we might already have a war across half the realm. If the capital is secured, we can avoid that war. And as you are here in King's Landing, you might protect the city from chaos. Renly's lips twitched in what might have been amusement or concern. So you propose a sort of, what shall we call it, an interim kingship? An immediate crowning for me, while we politely ignore that my elder brother has the more rightful claim. Ned took a breath. I do not relish ignoring rightful claims, but we live in desperate times. Once the dust settles, if there is a means to bring Stannis here peacefully and pass the crown to him in a safe transition, I would not oppose it. The alternative is letting the Lannisters tighten their hold until they are impossible to dislodge without open war. You must see that. Renly circled around the table, his elegant robes trailing behind him, the gold-trimmed edges catching candlelight. You are offering me a chance at the Iron Throne, however temporary or uncertain. And you plan to do so by orchestrating a coup, rather than waiting for the cogs of open war to grind us all into bloody dust. Ned nodded, though each word he spoke felt heavy. Yes. Why not gather your banners and fight the Lannisters in the field? Renly asked, his tone cautious. That war would devour the realm, Ned replied quietly. And you know it. I will not let my homeland or yours bleed over the vanity of House Lannister. We must take them by surprise, in a single swift strike that removes them from power. So I ask you plainly, will you help me? Renly said nothing for a moment, studying Ned's face as though searching for any sign of duplicity. Then he nodded slowly. I will, if only because I cannot bear the thought of Cersei Lannister and her false children ruling the Seven Kingdoms. Whatever else may come, Robert's true legacy must be preserved. Ned breathed a sigh of relief he had not known he was holding. He extended a hand, and Renly gripped it firmly. They needed each other. Without Renly's support, Ned would stand alone against a cunning foe. And without Ned's plan, Renly's ambitions, whatever shape they took, would never come to pass. Before leaving, Ned explained the basic outline of the coup. He told Renly that in 2 days' time, under the pretense of calling a meeting of the small council to address the transition of power following Robert's recent hunting accident and dire condition, they would isolate Cersei, Joffrey, and the Lannister guards within the throne room. Meanwhile, the City Watch, if all went according to plan, would seal off the Red Keep, disarming or detaining any Lannister men. A faint worry gnawed at Ned's mind. This plan relied heavily on the compliance of Littlefinger and the City Watch. But as he left Renly's chambers, Ned resolved that he must not place blind trust in Petyr Baelish. He would need a failsafe, perhaps in the form of bribes offered directly to key officers among the Gold Cloaks, or even more discreet allies in the city. Early the next morning, before the corridors filled with bustling courtiers and servants, Ned paid a visit to Varys the Spider. He found the Master of Whisperers in his private sanctum, a shadowy room that smelled faintly of incense. Varys stood in billowing robes, wearing a polite smile that seemed perpetually affixed to his round face. "My Lord Hand," Varys said in his soothing, near-whispering tone. What brings you to my humble quarters so early? I trust all is well. Ned regarded the spymaster steadily. I need to know if I have your cooperation in what is to come, Lord Varys. Varys parted his lips in a small, almost demure chuckle. And what is to come, if I might inquire? You know of Joffrey's parentage. Ned's voice was measured, but firm. You know the Queen intends to proclaim him king. That cannot be allowed. I have heard you say your only aim is the good of the realm. Well, if war breaks out over the succession, the realm will bleed. So my men and I are taking a different course. Varys's eyes glittered in the half-light. A different course, indeed. You wish to remove the Lannisters from power, quietly, without plunging us into open war. A bold, and I dare say, cunning plan. Ned did not try to hide his surprise at Varys's awareness. He should have guessed that the Master of Whisperers already knew. You know everything, it seems, Ned said. Varys made a show of widening his eyes. Not quite everything, my lord, but I do try. So, you come to me now to secure my endorsement? Yes, Ned said simply. If you truly serve the realm, you will help me ensure that the Lannisters do not have the chance to raise their banners and cast the kingdoms into war. Varys tapped his fingertips together, smiling, though a hint of genuine curiosity came through. If you are victorious, who do you plan to place upon the Iron Throne? That is not decided, Ned replied. Officially, Stannis Baratheon is the rightful heir, but he is far from here. Renly Baratheon stands ready to take power, if only temporarily, so that the city remains secure. We need stability in King's Landing, and we need it quickly. Or do you disagree? I do not, Varys said. Though I wonder how Lord Stannis will react if he arrives to find his younger brother crowned in his stead. Stannis is not a man who takes slights lightly. Nevertheless, that is a concern for another day. Ned's voice grew firmer. And for now, Varys said gently, I see no reason not to assist you. The Lannisters are formidable, yes, but if their power can be curtailed without wholesale slaughter, all the better for the small folk. And you know how I love the small folk. Ned gave a short nod. It was as much of a confirmation as he could hope for. Varys was slippery, no doubt, but his apparent willingness to support this coup reassured Ned that the spymaster would not immediately tip off Cersei. In King's Landing, that was a small miracle indeed. Thus, the days slipped by in careful preparation. A hush of conspiracy blanketed certain corners of the Red Keep. Ned moved like a shadow, giving no outward sign of what he intended, speaking to his men and allies only in coded whispers. He made certain that when the false succession was officially announced, he would be ready. He was also careful to avoid triggering Cersei's suspicion. Despite his efforts, Cersei Lannister was no fool. She kept watch over Ned with her sharp green eyes. On one occasion, she cornered him near the royal sept, the storied building with its grand pillars and stained glass windows that captured the light of day in resplendent hues. She had come to pray for Robert's swift recovery, or so she claimed, though Ned suspected her prayers for the king's life were empty. She stepped forward, her gaze flicking to the few courtiers and septons milling about, and then returning to Ned. Lord Stark, I hear you've been spending a great deal of time in private meetings. It warms my heart to see you so dedicated to your duties as Hand. Her smile was a blade cloaked in velvet. Ned forced his own expression to remain neutral. Your Grace, my duties are many. As the realm sits in uncertainty over the king's health, I must oversee a great many matters. And matters of succession, no doubt, Cersei said softly. You do recall that Joffrey is Robert's eldest son, yes? He inclined his head. So I've been told, Your Grace. Rest assured, I am loyal to the crown. His words were polite, but both of them knew they were playing a dangerous game. If Cersei had any inkling of his true intentions, she gave no sign except for the faintest glimmer of distrust in her eyes. She left him with a final warning disguised as courtesy. I hope you remember that the Lannisters always repay their debts, and we always protect what is ours. With that, she swept away, her golden hair swishing over her shoulders, her gown trailing on the polished floor. Ned breathed a silent sigh of relief. The moment had come and gone, and he remained unexposed, for now. At last, the morning arrived when Robert Baratheon's wounded state grew even more precarious. Word spread that he was at death's door from the wound inflicted by the boar. The final impetus for Ned's coup had come. Officially, the small council convened to discuss the regency and the line of succession. Unofficially, Ned's plan was set to unfold. He sat in the council chamber, watching as the key figures filed in one by one. Cersei was there, clad in dark mourning gowns she wore to display her supposed grief for her husband's condition. With her walked Pycelle, who wrung his hands as if afflicted by deep worry, though Ned suspected the Grand Maester's concern was more for his own safety than the king's. Renly arrived in a subdued cloak of deep green. Littlefinger slipped in with practiced stealth, wearing a half-smile that betrayed nothing. Varys too was there, silent as a shadow, scanning the room with his darting eyes. Ser Barristan Selmy stood to the side, a paragon of knighthood, looking grave and stately in his Kingsguard armor. Joffrey did not appear. Presumably, he was somewhere preparing himself for the moment when he would be declared king in truth, perhaps in the throne room or at his mother's side. Ned had expected a formal session, but to his surprise, Cersei cut to the heart of the matter the moment everyone was seated. "The king is dying," she announced, her voice cracking with a note of feigned sorrow. "We must make arrangements for the safety of the realm. Joffrey is his rightful heir, and he will be crowned as soon as the bells toll for Robert's passing." Ned inhaled slowly. This was it. He raised his voice. "Your Grace, I suggest we proceed with caution. The king's will." Cersei's lips curved into a thin smile. "The king's will named me regent if he passed, ensuring that I guide Joffrey until he comes of age. That is the law." Littlefinger interjected with a mild laugh. "Laws and wills are indeed important, but we all know that the reality of power rests on the acceptance of the great houses. Let us not forget them, my lords." Renly gave a delicate cough. "I believe we must also consider the possibility that details regarding succession might be challenged." Cersei's eyes snapped to him. "Challenged? By whom?" Renly spread his hands as if in apology. "By men who have proof that Joffrey is not Robert's true son." A hush fell. Cersei's expression flared into rage, and she advanced on Renly, ignoring the rest of the council. "Are you accusing me of treason, my Lord Baratheon?" Renly was about to speak again when Ned rose from his seat, placing his hand on the table. He kept his voice calm but loud enough to command attention. "We all know the rumors. The whispers have grown too loud to ignore. The realm must have clarity, or we risk tearing Westeros apart in conflict." Cersei's cheeks flushed red. "You dare?" Ned faced her fully. "I do. For the sake of the realm, your grace, you and your children must be placed under protective custody until the matter is settled. No harm will come to you if you surrender peacefully." "You would depose me?" Cersei nearly hissed. Her hand rose to her throat, and she cast a fierce glance at Varys and Littlefinger, as if trying to gauge where they stood. Outside the chamber doors, the sound of rushed footsteps echoed. Then the doors burst open. City watchmen with gold cloaks hurried in, armed and ready. For a heartbeat, Ned feared they had come to arrest him, but he caught the eye of Janos Slynt, the commander of the city watch, who nodded curtly at him. Ned turned back to Cersei. "Your Grace, in the name of King Robert, I command you to step down." Cersei's eyes widened. She looked at the city watch, expecting them to act in her defense. But the gold-cloaked men did not move against Ned. Instead, they fanned out around the edges of the room, blocking any escape. Littlefinger slowly stood, his expression unreadable. "My Lord Hand, it seems you've orchestrated quite the spectacle, but you might consider if all the city watch stands behind you. If not, this ends in blood." Ned locked gazes with him. "I have done what I must. Shall we see how loyal they are to the realm?" A tense silence followed, broken only by Cersei's ragged breathing. At length, she turned to Janos Slynt with a regal command in her voice. "Commander, arrest Lord Stark for treason against the crown." Slynt did not move. His expression was tight, but he shook his head. "Begging your pardon, your grace, but the hand has the lawful authority here. We are sworn to obey him, so long as King Robert lives." Fury flashed across Cersei's face like lightning. She made one last attempt, shifting her gaze to Ser Barristan. "Ser Barristan, defend your queen." Barristan looked torn, but his white cloak and his vow as a Kingsguard compelled him to protect the monarch. Yet was Cersei truly the monarch? Or was she the traitor, having conspired to place a false heir on the throne? His confusion was plain. Before Barristan could decide, the city watch closed in. Swords were drawn, and for a dreadful moment, it seemed that bloodshed was inevitable right there in the council chamber. Ned raised his hand. "No one need die today," he said, voice reverberating. He turned to Cersei. "This is not the end of House Lannister. You will be treated with respect. But you must come quietly." Cersei's mouth quivered with fury and despair. She saw the circle of armed men, realized her position was hopeless. She had not prepared for a betrayal by the city watch, having assumed her gold would secure their loyalty. But it was too late now. "You are making a grave mistake, Stark," she warned in a tremulous voice. "The Lannisters will not forget this." Ned stiffened. "Take her away peacefully, and see that she is placed under guard in her quarters. Make certain she is kept safe. She is still the mother of the king's children, and I do not want her harmed." At his signal, gold cloaks escorted Cersei from the room, her voice echoing with threats and outrage. Pycelle tottered after them, wringing his hands and mumbling half-formed protests. Littlefinger stood off to the side, regarding the unfolding coup with that thin, calculating smile of his. Varys, for his part, simply looked on, saying nothing. Renly let out a breath of relief. "The hardest part is done," he said, though his voice shook slightly. Ned nodded, feeling the rush of adrenaline coursing through him. "Now we must secure the rest of the Red Keep, and we must find Joffrey before he can rally any resistance." A small detail wormed its way into Ned's mind. He had not seen or heard any sign of Tyrion Lannister, nor had there been word of Jaime Lannister in the city. If either man was near, they could cause serious trouble. But one step at a time. They had to confirm Robert's condition and ensure Joffrey was neutralized before the false prince could strike back. Quickly, Ned assembled his men, flanked by gold cloaks loyal to him through bribes or sense of duty. He dared not guess which weighed heavier in their minds. Moving in a tight formation, they swept through the Red Keep's corridors, seizing Lannister guards wherever they found them. Most surrendered when they realized the city watch did not stand with them. Only a few tried to fight, and those were quickly overpowered. At last, Ned stood before the doors of the royal apartments, where Joffrey was said to be. 2 Kingsguard posted there, Meryn Trant and Boros Blunt, looked alarmed at the large group confronting them. "In the name of the king," Ned announced, "stand aside. We are here by order of the hand." Meryn Trant sneered. "The king gave us no such orders. If you wish to pass, you do so over our dead bodies." Ned felt a surge of dread. He did not wish to kill Kingsguard in cold blood. He could already see the tension among his men, the city watch lifting spears, unsure if they would have to shed blood. But just then, the door behind the Kingsguard swung open, and Joffrey himself appeared, flanked by the hound Sandor Clegane, whose impassive face and scarred features provided a menacing contrast to the boy's regal attire. Joffrey wore a rich tunic embroidered with golden lions, and his expression was a mix of arrogance and confusion. "What is the meaning of this?" Joffrey demanded, his voice pitched high with fear disguised as anger. "I am the king." Ned stepped forward, calling upon every ounce of authority he possessed. "You are not the true-born son of Robert Baratheon. By the king's own words, you have no right to the Iron Throne." For a moment, Joffrey looked genuinely stunned. Then his face twisted in rage. "Lies! You dare slander my mother? I'll have your head for this, Stark." Sandor Clegane kept a hand on his sword, though he did not draw it. He looked from Joffrey to Ned, and then to the city watch, who outnumbered them. If he fought, he might kill many, but he could not hold them all off, and even he could see that. Ned met Sandor's eyes. "I do not wish to harm the boy. Stand aside, and you will not be punished for protecting him." The hound's jaw clenched. He glanced at Joffrey, who was practically frothing with anger, and then back at the gathered men. The moment stretched taut, like a drawn bowstring. At last, the hound lowered his gaze and stepped aside with a grunt, as if letting go of something. Meryn Trant and Boros Blunt glanced at each other, uncertain. But with the hound giving way, they found themselves at a disadvantage. Slowly, grudgingly, they too parted enough for Ned and his men to advance. Ned drew close to Joffrey, speaking quietly. "You will come with us peacefully. You are not to be harmed so long as you comply. I give you my word as Eddard Stark." Joffrey looked as though he wanted to spit in Ned's face, but he was too frightened to resist openly. He tried to gather the tatters of his dignity, standing taller and glaring at Ned. "You will rue this day," he hissed. "My grandfather will not stand for it. My Uncle Jaime—" Ned didn't let him finish. "Take him to a secure chamber," he told the gold cloaks. "Treat him well, but do not allow him to leave." They led Joffrey away, the young prince's curses echoing in the corridor. A hush lingered in his wake, broken only by the shuffle of feet. Ned thanked the hound for not resisting, and Sandor shrugged. "I fight for the living. The boy might be king or might be nothing. Makes no difference to me if he can't pay for my sword." With that, he turned and strode away, leaving Ned uncertain where the hound's loyalties truly lay. In the hours that followed, the palace was secured. Cersei, Joffrey, and the Lannister guards were placed under watch. Word spread to the city that Robert Baratheon was gravely ill, that Ned Stark had taken command to maintain peace, and that until the king recovered or passed, there would be no coronation. Some in the city believed this was merely a stalling tactic. Others whispered of the rumors that Joffrey was not Robert's son. But for now, chaos did not reign. The city watch maintained order, and no banners were raised in open rebellion. At midday, Ned finally found time to visit Robert Baratheon's bedside. The king lay pale and unmoving, eyes half-lidded, breath shallow. The boar had gutted him severely, and the maesters had done all they could. Renly stood at the foot of the bed, his face ashen, staring at his brother with an inscrutable expression. Perhaps grief, perhaps bitterness, perhaps both. Ned knelt by the bed, pressing a hand to Robert's brow. It was hot, and sweat beaded across the king's forehead. Robert's eyes flickered open for a moment, focusing on Ned with difficulty. "Ned," he rasped, each syllable strained. Ned leaned closer. "I'm here, Robert. Is it true?" Robert asked, voice little more than a breath. "Cersei, the children, they are not mine?" Ned hesitated. He did not want to heap despair upon a dying man. But Robert's question deserved an honest answer. "They are not," Ned said softly. Robert closed his eyes, and a tear slipped down his cheek, lost in the coarse beard. "All these years, gods." He shuddered, racked with pain. Then he muttered, "I wanted a son." Ned's throat tightened. He felt a wave of pity for the man who had once been his closest friend, who had fought with him, celebrated with him, claimed the throne together. How had it come to this? "You have a chance to set things right," Ned said. "There can still be peace, and the realm need not descend into war. Your brother Renly is here." At that, Robert's eyes opened again. His gaze drifted to Renly, who took a step forward, face grim. Robert rasped, "Stannis should be—" His voice broke off, whether from pain or from inability to complete his thought. Ned frowned. If Robert intended to confirm that Stannis was the rightful heir, then they would have a delicate task indeed in explaining why Renly was stepping in. But the point might be moot if Robert died before giving an official decree. Robert tried to lift an arm, beckoning Ned closer. His lips moved, forming words that Ned struggled to catch. "Take care of them," he managed at last. "No more war." Then, with a ragged exhalation, Robert Baratheon closed his eyes, and his hand went limp. Ned felt the final stirrings of life leave the king's body. Silence filled the chamber, oppressive and bleak. Renly inhaled sharply, turning away. "Farewell, old friend," Ned whispered, gently lowering Robert's hand. He glanced at Renly, who stood rigid, as though not quite sure how to react. "The king is dead." Renly met his gaze. "Then the matter of succession must be decided immediately. We can't afford a power vacuum." Ned rose, his knees protesting. He walked to the door, giving the word to the gold cloaks stationed outside. Robert Baratheon was dead, and in his name, the Lord Hand had declared the queen and her children unfit to rule. The city watch would maintain order until a new king was decided. The men nodded gravely and passed on the message. Within an hour, the bells of King's Landing began to toll, signaling the king's death to the city. Citizens flooded the streets in mourning or in curiosity, uncertain what would follow. But the gold cloaks patrolled the thoroughfares, ensuring no large-scale riots broke out. In the Red Keep, tension simmered. With Cersei and Joffrey both in custody, the question on every lip was, who would wear the crown now? Ned convened a gathering in the throne room. The Iron Throne loomed above them, a jagged silhouette of swords in the flickering torchlight. The dais was empty, no one daring to sit upon that monstrous seat of power without final agreement on the rightful heir. Arrayed before it were the members of the small council who remained: Renly, Varys, Littlefinger, Pycelle, closely guarded, and Ser Barristan. Also present were a handful of high lords who happened to be in King's Landing, plus a strong contingent of the city watch. Renly stepped forward, wearing black to mark his mourning, though the stag of House Baratheon was subtly embroidered in gold on his sleeve. He addressed the hall with a firm voice. "The king is dead. Robert Baratheon, first of his name, has passed from this world, leaving no trueborn offspring behind." A soft murmur spread among the gathered lords and counselors. Renly's gaze flicked to Ned, as if seeking confirmation. Ned gave a slight nod. They had agreed to deliver the news plainly, without indulging the lurid details of the incest rumor. The truth would spread soon enough, but for now, they only needed the realm to understand that Joffrey was disinherited. "As Robert's youngest brother, I make no false claim to stand above Stannis in the line of succession," Renly continued, voice ringing out. "But Stannis is not here. The realm stands on the brink of turmoil. I offer myself as caretaker of the throne, a regent, if you will, until my elder brother can arrive and assume his rightful place. If, upon arrival, Stannis proves his claim and is recognized by the great houses, I shall gladly step aside." His words carried a careful note of humility, but Ned could see the glimmer of ambition in the younger Baratheon's eyes. He wondered if Renly truly intended to yield to Stannis, or if this was merely a gambit to secure the crown for himself. Still, Ned believed that forcing the realm to wait in uncertainty for Stannis would invite the Lannisters, and possibly other houses, to make plays for power. A regency under Renly might indeed be the best compromise to maintain peace. Some of the high lords in attendance called out their agreement, while others looked uneasy. Lord Mace Tyrell, who had arrived in the city just days prior, stood up in the throng. "House Tyrell supports Lord Renly's regency," he declared. "We cannot allow chaos to reign." Others followed suit. The lords who harbored no love for the Lannisters took comfort in the idea that Renly, amiable and charming, might maintain order. Those more aligned with the Lannisters were conspicuously absent or silent, aware that their masters were currently locked away. Ned stepped forward, raising a hand. "As Lord Hand, I have taken measures to ensure the Queen and her children are kept safe, pending an inquiry into their lineage. They will remain under guard but treated with the respect befitting their station. Our goal is to maintain peace and protect the people of King's Landing. All who swear fealty to Lord Renly as regent shall be spared any repercussions for past loyalties." Renly gave Ned a grateful nod, and the tension in the hall seemed to lessen. Varys glided forward, bowing with a flourish. "I, for one, welcome Lord Renly's stewardship during these uncertain times. May our new regent lead with wisdom and compassion." Littlefinger, leaning on his cane, said nothing. He merely offered an inscrutable smile that revealed none of his inner thoughts. Ned didn't trust him in the least, but Baelish had chosen not to oppose the coup. Perhaps he was already calculating how best to leverage the situation. Thus, in a surprisingly bloodless transition, surprising for King's Landing, Renly Baratheon was declared regent. The next order of business was to secure the realm's acceptance of this arrangement. Ravens would be sent to all the great houses, announcing Robert's death and declaring Renly the protector of the realm until Stannis' return. Ned hoped this might avoid the wars that had nearly been inevitable. As the throng began to disperse, Ned felt an immense wave of relief wash over him. Perhaps, just perhaps, he had managed the impossible, removing the Lannisters from absolute power without sparking a war. The city, for the moment, remained calm. Nobles in attendance pledged themselves to keep the peace until Stannis' arrival. And if all went well, the question of succession would be resolved through a sober recognition of Stannis' claim, or by some arrangement that satisfied the key houses without the realm bleeding. Yet Ned knew better than to believe the matter fully settled. The Lannisters would not remain idle. Tywin Lannister, father to Cersei and Jaime, still commanded vast armies in the Westerlands. Jaime himself was nowhere to be found. Tyrion Lannister, the imp, might be cunning enough to work behind the scenes. There was no telling what alliances or revenge plots might be spinning outside the walls of King's Landing. For now, though, Ned had seized the capital without a pitched battle, and the realm stood a chance at avoiding a broad civil war. That alone was a victory worth savoring, however briefly. The bells tolling for King Robert's death resonated throughout the day, mingling with the hum of the city's daily life. Small folk gathered outside the Red Keep, mourning the passing of the king who had once been hailed as a war hero. Vendors sold ribbons of black cloth, which citizens tied around their arms in a show of bereavement. In taverns, mourners raised cups in Robert's name, recalling how he'd once been so full of vitality, and cursing the boar that had ended his life. Meanwhile, inside the Red Keep, Ned and Renly went about consolidating power. They reshuffled the guard, ensuring that men loyal to the new regime controlled the walls, gates, and strategic points of the castle. They replaced Lannister sympathizers in key posts, though few were truly dedicated to House Lannister once the Queen was out of favor. Most had simply followed the gold. As long as the new administration paid them and kept them safe, they were content to serve. In a private audience with Renly that evening, Ned laid out the next steps. The newly minted regent paced in a well-appointed solar, occasionally sipping a cup of rich wine. Ned stood near the window, looking out over the city as dusk fell. "Stannis must be informed," Ned said. "He needs to know the king's final wishes, or at least the official line, that Robert died without a trueborn heir, and that you have been named protector of the realm in the interim. If Stannis is reasonable, he will see that we acted to prevent a Lannister coup." Renly ran a hand through his dark hair. "My brother is many things, but reasonable is rarely one of them. He will view my regency as a usurpation. He will also be furious that we accused Cersei's children of being bastards without him here to confirm or deny the claim. But the truth remains the truth. If he sets foot in the capital, will he accept that I am only holding the throne for him?" Ned exhaled. "We must make the best of it. Prepare the city for his arrival, and ensure he sees that your regency has kept the peace. If all is well, perhaps Stannis will simply take the throne, and you can remain as his close advisor. No war, no further bloodshed." A fleeting shadow passed across Renly's face, and Ned wondered again if the younger Baratheon truly intended to cede power. But Renly said nothing to contradict Ned's plan. Instead, he nodded and lifted his cup in a half-hearted toast. "To peace, then." Ned did not raise a cup. He simply inclined his head. "To peace." The next morning, ravens were dispatched to Dragonstone, to Riverrun, to the Eyrie, to Winterfell, and to every great seat in the realm, bearing word of Robert's death, the captivity of the Queen and her children, and the establishment of Renly Baratheon as regent. The message invited each house to send representatives to King's Landing for a grand council, wherein the question of succession would be addressed under the watch of the High Lords. Despite these efforts at diplomacy, Ned could not shake the gnawing sense of unease. He busied himself with the daily tasks of ruling, meeting with petitioners, overseeing the city watch, dealing with supply lines for the capital. All the while, he wondered when Tywin Lannister would respond, and how. The old lion would not let his daughter and grandchildren remain in captivity without a fight. Nor would Jaime remain silent forever. The sword of Damocles still hung over them, even if they'd gained a moment's respite. That respite was broken a few days later by the arrival of a ragged party of riders at the city gates, seeking audience with the Hand. Ned, alerted to their coming, received them in the courtyard of the Red Keep. As the gates swung open, a dozen weary men rode in, dust clinging to their cloaks. They bore no obvious sigils, but Ned sensed a certain quality to them, hardened warriors, likely more dangerous than they appeared. At their head rode a slight figure with mismatched eyes and a knowing smirk. Tyrion Lannister. The imp dismounted awkwardly, favoring one leg. His men, Sells-wards perhaps, formed a loose semicircle behind him. The city watchguards tensed, uncertain whether to seize Tyrion immediately or allow him to speak. Ned approached, clad in plain attire that belied his station. He studied Tyrion's face, seeing no trace of fear, only grim determination. "Lord Tyrion," Ned said, his voice echoing in the courtyard. "You come to King's Landing at an interesting time." Tyrion brushed dust from his tunic, cocking his head. "So I've heard. My sister is imprisoned, my nephew dethroned, and my father likely foaming at the mouth with fury." Ned's expression remained impassive. "You are under the protection of the City Watch while you are here. But you must know that, given recent events, your presence alone could be seen as a provocation." Tyrion's lips twitched. "I come unarmed, Lord Stark, and with no illusions. I merely wish to parley if you will allow it. I have no intention of raising a rebellion in the Red Keep. Someone has already beaten me to that." He extended a scroll case. "A letter from my father, to be delivered to the hand of the king, or should I say, to the hand of the regent?" Ned beckoned a guard to retrieve the scroll. He unrolled it carefully, scanning Tywin Lannister's words. As he read, the corners of his mouth tightened. The letter was a formal protest at the unlawful imprisonment of Queen Cersei and her royal children, along with a demand for their immediate release. Tywin, in no uncertain terms, threatened dire consequences if any harm befell his daughter or grandchildren. He also insisted that the crown was a holy institution, and that only the High Septon or a proper Great Council could question Joffrey's legitimacy. In other words, Tywin was prepared to march. Ned sighed, rolling the letter back up. "Your father is as subtle as a cudgel," he observed. "He suggests war if we refuse to free Cersei and Joffrey." Tyrion shrugged. "My father doesn't deal well with kidnappers." Ned stiffened. "They are not kidnapped. They are under arrest for treason, pending a formal trial. Joffrey's claim to the throne is invalid, and the realm must be protected from your family's ambitions." Tyrion's eyes flickered with a hint of anger, though he kept his tone composed. "You might understand why the Lannisters don't see it that way. Still, I have come to speak. I suggest you let me see my sister, so I might reassure my father that she and the children are not being mistreated." Ned considered the request. Allowing Tyrion to see Cersei could be risky, but refusing him might push Tywin to immediate hostilities. After a moment, Ned nodded. "Very well. You may see her under guard. But do not attempt any mischief, or you will both regret it." Tyrion lifted his shoulders in a grandiose bow, an odd sight from a dwarf. "I am at your mercy, Lord Stark. Lead on." Ned led the way through the courtyard, up the steps, into the winding halls that led to the tower apartments where Cersei and her children were kept under lock and key. Along the way, Ned's men parted for them, though they eyed Tyrion's Sells-wards with suspicion. The group arrived at a guarded door, behind which Cersei was confined. A key turned in the lock, and the door swung open, revealing a moderately comfortable suite. Cersei sat in a chair near a window, her hair disheveled, her eyes red with anger or tears or both. Joffrey sulked in a corner, flanked by gold cloaks. Myrcella sat on a small bench, quietly clutching a doll. Tommen was absent, likely in another chamber. At the sight of Tyrion, Cersei stood abruptly, her expression shifting to a mix of hope and venom. "Tyrion, what are you doing here?" Tyrion entered, spreading his arms. "I came to see you, dear sister, in your moment of captivity. Father is quite displeased with the turn of events." Cersei's laugh was brittle. "I'm sure he is. Well, as you see, I remain a prisoner of Lord Stark's mercy. Have you come to gloat, or to help me escape?" Tyrion cast a meaningful glance at Ned and the guards. "With that audience, I fear any attempt to spring you from captivity would be ill-advised." He turned to Ned, his tone adopting a note of politeness. "May I speak with my sister privately?" Ned shook his head. "I will not leave you unattended, but I can allow you to speak quietly in a corner. The guards will remain." Cersei scoffed but took Tyrion's arm, leading him to a corner of the suite, away from Joffrey and Myrcella. Ned motioned for the guards to keep an eye on them but remain out of earshot. He himself stepped back, letting them have a modicum of privacy. Even so, he studied their body language, Cersei's flaring temper, Tyrion's measured calm. After a brief, heated exchange, Tyrion rejoined Ned, leaving Cersei behind with a look of cold fury. Joffrey said nothing, arms folded, staring daggers at Tyrion and Ned alike. Myrcella looked up, her eyes wide and frightened, but said nothing. Ned led Tyrion back outside the chamber, and the door was once again locked. Tyrion turned to Ned. "That was briefer than I would have liked, but I suppose I should be grateful for any visitation." Ned's gaze hardened. "What did you tell her?" Tyrion smirked. "That is between my sister and me, but suffice it to say, I advised her to remain calm, to show the realm that House Lannister is the injured party here. She is no fool, though she may act rashly. I promised her I would do what I can to see her released." "Which is not going to happen," Ned said flatly. "Is it not? My father will not sit idly by while the Queen and his grandchildren are detained. War is inevitable, Lord Stark, unless you find some compromise that saves the Lannister pride." Ned's brow furrowed. "Such as?" Tyrion rubbed his chin. "A public admission that Joffrey is not the rightful heir. That much you won't budge on, I gather. But perhaps you could release Cersei and send her away from King's Landing. She and the children might live in Casterly Rock, safely out of reach. In return, my father might not respond with steel." Ned paused, considering. Could he truly allow Cersei and her children to leave, free to conspire from afar? It was a risk, but if it averted the war, "The boy is dangerous. He believes he's the rightful king," Ned said. "If I let him slip through my fingers, that is an invitation to rebellion." "Perhaps," Tyrion admitted. "But if he's proven a bastard, how many houses will rise in his name? Will they defy half the realm over him? Or might the lion simply roar in anger but lack the strength to tear the kingdom apart?" Ned could not deny that was a possibility. Yet neither could he ignore Tywin's formidable armies. One way or another, the Lannisters were going to fight for their family's pride. Unless Ned realized, they saw they had no chance of winning. That meant forging stronger alliances for the new regime, ensuring the Lannisters faced a united front. If the entire realm was behind Stannis, or Renly for that matter, would Tywin truly dare risk everything in a losing war? He eyed Tyrion. "I will consider your proposal, but do not expect an answer soon. The realm is still adjusting to Robert's death and the new regency." Tyrion inclined his head. "Well enough. In the meantime, I shall remain in King's Landing, if you'll permit me. My father's letter suggests I must be his eyes and ears here." Ned was wary, but turning away a Lannister envoy might signal that the crown was unwilling to negotiate. "Very well, but you will be watched carefully." "My thanks, Lord Stark," Tyrion said, not sounding particularly thankful. "I hope this arrangement spares us all a great deal of bloodshed." With that, he limped away, his cell's words trailing, and Ned wondered if he had just let a viper into the nest or allowed a door to be opened toward peace. Time would tell. Weeks passed, and the city did not fall into chaos as many feared. Renly, as regent, held daily audiences in the throne room, addressing the complaints of merchants, nobles, and small folk alike. His charm and fairness, combined with Ned's more rigid sense of justice, created a sense of stability. The gold cloaks enforced a strict peace, and more lords arrived from across the realm to pay respects to the late king and see what was to become of the capital. Some lords demanded Joffrey's release, but more came to accept that he was not the rightful heir. Documents supporting the claim were circulated, showing the Baratheon lineage with black hair for generations, pointing out the golden-haired anomaly that was Joffrey. Gossip spread like wildfire, and Cersei's incest with Jaime, though rarely spoken outright in polite company, became an open secret. The Lannisters lost much of their moral high ground in the eyes of many. Nevertheless, House Lannister was not undone. Reports arrived that Tywin was gathering an army at Harrenhal, forging alliances with houses loyal to gold. Jaime Lannister was rumored to be riding at the head of a host, though no direct attacks on the crown's forces had yet occurred. The tension grew daily, even as King's Landing lived in a temporary calm. Then, at last, another raven came from Dragonstone. Stannis Baratheon had received the news of Robert's death and the coup against the Lannisters. In a brief but curtly worded missive, he announced that he would soon sail for the mainland with forces loyal to him, to claim the throne as Robert's rightful heir. No mention was made of Renly's regency or of Ned Stark's role in the upheaval. But one phrase stood out: "The Iron Throne is mine by right, and I will brook no delay in securing my inheritance." Ned showed the letter to Renly. The regent read it aloud, making no effort to hide the disgust in his tone. "By right," he says. "Well, I have no argument with that, strictly speaking, but the manner of it—" He snorted, tossing the parchment onto a table in the council chamber. "He doesn't even acknowledge my efforts to keep the city safe in his absence." Ned rubbed his temples. "We knew this day would come. Stannis is not a man who would graciously accept any help he did not personally command. Still, if he arrives peacefully and sees how the city stands behind your regency, perhaps he will be satisfied that you only acted in his best interest." Renly scoffed. "Or he will declare me a traitor for presuming to hold the throne in his stead." "Would he go that far?" Ned asked, though he knew the answer might well be yes. Renly's lips pressed into a line. "If he does, I won't surrender the city to him without ensuring that we do not invite chaos again. The people need stability, Ned. They know me. They trust me. What do they know of Stannis, who cloisters himself on Dragonstone and worships foreign gods?" A flicker of alarm crossed Ned's mind. Was Renly hinting that he might defy Stannis if the elder brother came claiming the throne? That could spark another round of civil war, which was exactly what Ned had tried so hard to avoid. The threat of Lannister retaliation was bad enough. Another schism among the Baratheons would be devastating. "Let us hope," Ned said carefully, "that you two can find a compromise. If not, the realm may yet face war on two fronts, Lannister in the west, Baratheon in the east." Renly nodded grimly. "Then we must be prepared. Raise more men, ensure the city's defenses are strong, and secure the alliances we have. I will receive Stannis with all due honor, but I will not simply hand him the keys to the kingdom if he refuses to acknowledge the stability I've provided." And so, preparations began in earnest. Messages were sent to loyal lords, urging them to reinforce King's Landing in anticipation of Stannis' arrival. Ned felt the uneasy stir of conflict brewing again. Despite all his best efforts, war might yet come. As the days wore on, Ned found himself at the heart of a precarious balancing act. He had dethroned the Lannisters in a coup that was supposed to avert a massive war. Yet now he saw the glimmers of conflict intensifying on multiple fronts. Tywin Lannister had not attacked yet, but he had also not shown any sign of capitulation. Stannis was on his way, likely spoiling for a fight if Renly did not yield. And in the midst of it all, Littlefinger maneuvered in the shadows, forging who knew what alliances. Varys kept whispering about the good of the realm while offering no concrete solution. And what of Cersei and her children? They remained locked in the Red Keep, their fate uncertain. Tyrion visited them frequently, and though he posed no open threat, Ned could sense him carefully laying groundwork for House Lannister's future play. Still, the city had not descended into anarchy. Trade continued, small folk went about their business, and the illusions of a functioning government persisted. Maybe Ned thought that was the best he could manage. Perhaps there was no perfect victory in the Game of Thrones. Only lesser evils, cunning alliances, and uneasy truces. One afternoon, Sansa and Arya arrived from their lessons. Ned had insisted they remain in King's Landing, though part of him wished desperately to send them home. But he wanted them close, lest the city become a battlefield. The courtyard was awash with sunshine as Arya practiced with her wooden sword, while Sansa strolled at Ned's side, asking endless questions about what would become of Joffrey. "He was going to be my betrothed," she said softly, a touch of sadness in her voice. "But if he's not truly the king or the prince, then what is he?" Ned hesitated, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "He is a boy who was misled by his mother, who believed he was something he was not." "And what will become of him now?" Sansa asked. "Will he be punished?" Ned sighed. "That depends on what the realm decides. For now, he remains under guard. If war breaks out, the question of his fate becomes more complicated. I pray it does not come to that." Arya bounded over, her eyes gleaming with curiosity. "If war comes, Father, will we fight the Lannisters or Stannis or who?" Ned knelt to look her in the eye. "We fight only if we must, Arya. My hope is that there will be no war. We are trying to prevent it." She wrinkled her nose. "You took the city without a war. Why can't you just do that everywhere?" Ned managed a wry smile. "It's not that simple, little one. The world is full of proud lords, each with their own armies and ambitions. Taking King's Landing without a war was a miracle of timing and cunning. We may not be so fortunate again." Arya nodded, not fully understanding, but trusting her father's wisdom. Sansa lingered near them, her thoughts still on Joffrey. Ned rose and placed a comforting hand on each daughter's shoulder. He felt their innocence like a raw wound, knowing how harsh the realm's realities could be. That evening, Ned met again with Renly in the council chambers, along with Varys, Littlefinger, and a few other key advisors. They discussed the possible approaches when Stannis arrived. Should they greet him with an honor guard at the city gates, or keep him at a distance? Should they attempt to finalize charges against Cersei and Joffrey before Stannis intervened? Should they keep them as hostages, perhaps bargaining chips? It was a swirl of decisions, each with high stakes. While Renly and the others argued, Ned's thoughts wandered to the north, to Winterfell, to the quiet life he had once known. He had never sought power, never wanted to rule from the Iron Throne. All he had ever wanted was to protect his family and uphold honor. Now he found himself immersed in intrigue and half-truths, forging alliances with men he did not trust, all in the name of preventing a greater bloodshed. A part of him wondered if it was worth the sacrifice. But then he remembered the thousands of small folk who would suffer if the realm was torn apart by warring factions, by Lannisters and Baratheons alike. He remembered Robert's final plea, "No more war," and he resolved that, come what may, he would see this through. He had deposed the Lannisters in a surgical strike rather than leading the North to open conflict. If he could maintain this fragile peace until the realm accepted Stannis, or at least a stable ruler, then perhaps he could return to Winterfell with his daughters alive, the realm intact. So Ned Stark pressed on, shoulders heavy with the weight of the crown he did not wear, but effectively bore. Outside, the night wind carried the distant cries of gulls from Blackwater Bay, and the moon cast pale light over the towers of the Red Keep. Tomorrow and the day after that, he would continue this precarious balancing act, hoping his coup would indeed spare the realm from a war more devastating than any had yet seen. He could only hope that, in the end, the realm would not swallow him whole. For in the Game of Thrones, even a man of honor who won a single victory would find new battles forever on the horizon, and each one threatened to unravel all he had worked to save.